Hi again, Bob Dickey here. I hope you've seen my video on how I use a test panel for getting the groove to the correct width for the inlay. But now it's time to apply an inlay strip on a box top already in progress. Here are just a few of the tools you'll see during the video. The router with plunge base and edge guide, a model maker's miter saw, and a shooting board. There are a couple more I'll mention as we go along. A couple of years after getting the edge guide, and a couple of Christmases and more box sales, I was able to get the microfence plunge base that fits a small router and has LED lighting. This makes it much easier to see and control what's going on. However, the edge guide remains the most valuable component. So I've cut the lid panel to size, and I had already inlaid an oval using a template inlay kit on the router. Then I lay out the lines to show where the inlay strip will go. Those lines help set up the initial edge guide location, but most importantly, they let me know where to stop routing to prevent going beyond the groove location. The next step is to adjust the router depth stop so that the groove will leave the inlay just slightly proud of the surface. It's much easier to scrape or sand the inlay than the entire panel, that's for sure. After that, I can start to make the initial cuts for the inlay strip. Finally, after having checked the groove and inlay dimensions and making a second pass to increase the groove width, I do a final check and I'm now ready to clean out and square the corners of the piece. So I use a corner chisel that's designed by Lee Valley Veritas specifically for working with inlays. The chisel registers itself on both outside edges of each corner, and a slight rap with a hammer will give you a good square edge and just need to chisel out the remaining stock. Now that the groove is cut and the corners are squared, it's time to go to work on cutting the individual lengths of inlay strip to fit in there. I do that on the small model maker's miter saw, works very effectively. For all the measurements, as well as making sure I've got the inlay strip fitting correctly, I work at the inside corners, which is more accurate and easy to use than outside corners. Here you can see I'm marking where that inside corner should line up with the inside of the groove, and that in turn is what I line up my saw with as I cut the next 45-degree angle. Usually that first cut brings in a piece that's just slightly longer, and so I use a little shooting board that I put together, and using a Lee Valley little shooting plane, and not actually a plane, it takes sandpaper for working with veneers. So I'm lining up that left top corner. That's my starting point. Getting that right where I want it to intersect. And making sure I've got a good fit. Once I do, I can move on to the next piece. And I'm going in a counterclockwise direction because that miter saw only has a single 45 slot. So that allows me to just move right down the inlay strip when I do this in a 45 degree, or when I do this in a counterclockwise direction, I should say. So again, fit it up, butt it up in that against that initial piece, lay it out and find out how it fits. It's slightly too long. Again, I'll bring in the shooting board and just sand off a small amount on one or both ends. And once I got a good fit there, then I can just continue around and do the other two pieces to finish up the cut and preset these inlay strips into the groove. This is a pretty easy strip because it does not have a distinctive pattern. Working with strips with patterns, sometimes we'll need to trim off an additional part of the end until you can match the pattern at the corners. Not so with this particular inlay. Down up to finishing the fit for that third piece. That one's a little bit more stubborn. Can't do anything with that in here. Once the pieces are all fit in and I'm happy with the fit of the inlay around all four sides, then basically I pop those strips out, keep them alongside the specific groove that they fit in, paint the inside of the groove with some PVA glue, making sure to get it fully into the corners, and then reinsert each of the strips. Once they're in, if necessary, I'll use a small block of wood and tap down any edges that might be sticking up. Lay a sheet of wax paper across the top, lay another flat piece of wood on there and clamp it all together. I take the clamps off in about 30 minutes and then let the piece fully dry. I usually like to sand rather than scrape because some inlays, especially if they're end grain or some uniquely active and figured woods, a scraper can somehow chip some pieces out of those inlays or roughen up the surface of the inlay. So I use sanding primarily. I sand it down with 100 grit, then go up to 120, 180 before I'm ready to go into my next step. So my next step, and actually the final step, is to use a grain filler to make sure that there are no gaps between the inlay itself and the panel that will show up, especially when you put the finish on. And I use Aqua Coat. It's a totally clear water-based grain filler. It goes on easily. You can sand it down in 30 minutes and come back and put another coat. Usually takes me 2 to 3 coats specifically along the inlay line to make sure I get that filled up, but that gives me a totally smooth surface once I apply the finish. So it works extremely well. Hope this has been helpful. Apologize for non-professionalism perhaps in the videotaping, but I'm trying to share some ideas and I hope they're worth something. Thanks much. And here's what it looks like when all is said and done.